Hello, my friends. Let's start with the news that during yesterday's drone attack, the Russians once again miscalculated the trajectory, or perhaps it's done on purpose, but the result is that a Shahed drone flew into Belarus and exploded in Kalinovichi in the Gomel region. This has been reported by Belarusian sources. Meanwhile, the Russians assured that after Putin changed their nuclear doctrine and officially declared that in case of drone or missile attacks on Russian territory, they would use nuclear weapons, nothing is happening. The strikes on Russia continues as before. At the same time, there are no reports of significant activity in the Kursk direction, though local skirmishes do occasionally break out. The front line remains unchanged. There is also information suggesting that the Russians have made some new advances in their counteroffensive here. However, the Ukrainian side hasn't yet confirmed this, so we are waiting for official statements. In the Kharkiv direction, the Russians continue shelling Kharkiv and the surrounding area, while in response, the Ukrainian forces are striking Belgorod and its region. Clashes are ongoing around Vovchansk and the village of Tikha, but there is no changes over the past day and the front line remains the same. It's important to know that Ukrainian forces tried to push the Russians out of Vovchansk. They were partially successful, but the advance have since stopped. As we can see, fully clearing this part of the front remains difficult, and the Russians are continuing the offensive actions here. In the Kupiansk direction, the Russians are actively using FPV drones to targeting Kupiansk. Offensive actions also continue around the areas of Synkivka and Kurylivka. So far, the Russians haven't made a major push toward their primary goal. However, they are continuing to pull in reserves today, so this brief pause may soon lead to a new wave of heightened activity. Over the past 24 hours, the Ukrainian forces managed to repel all attacks and the front line remains unchanged. In the Svatove direction, the Russians are conducting offensive actions on the fields near Stelmachivka, but they've had no new successes. Further south, fighting continues around Kharkivka and the village of Makiivka, but no significant changes have been observed along the front line in this area either. In the Kreminna area, the Russians haven't changed their direction of attacks. Nearly every day, battles occur around Nevske as they attempt to break through to the water obstacle and storm Toretsk, but they haven't made any significant progress. It's important to know that some cartographers, based on statements from the Russian Minister of Defense, show Nevske and Makiivka as being under Russian control, but there is no solid evidence to support this claim. Typically, geolocation data and video confirmations appear when this happens. Russians usually enjoy immediately publishing footage of them raising their flags, but in this case, there is been no such information, so most likely these settlements remain contested and the fighting continues. In the Siversk direction, the Ukrainian side still hasn't confirmed the capture of the village of Verkhnyo-Kamensk by Russian forces. The front line remains unchanged and no new attacks have been recorded in the past 24 hours. On the other maps, again, based on statements from the Russian Minister of Defense, it's claimed that the village is under Russian control, but once again, no geolocation evidence supports this. Ukrainian reports from the area indicate that the Russians are merely attempting to capture the settlement. In the Chasiv Yar direction, the situation remains difficult, but the Ukrainian forces are doing everything possible to prevent the Russians from encircling the town. So far, they haven't managed to advance along the flanks despite ongoing fighting near Myrnohrad and their occasional breakthroughs toward the village of Maiske. However, all attacks are being repelled. Meanwhile, the Russians continue their attempts to break through directly in the Kurylivka area, with battles taking place near the tree line. Despite their efforts, they haven't been able to make any significant advances. In the Toretsk direction, the situation is worse. The Russian forces have made more progress here and are now practically in the center of Toretsk. They managed to break through over the course of several months without the need to encircle the city. Fighting continues near Shcherbinivka and Lipivka, and the Russians have also begun assaulting Delivka. We're still waiting to see the outcome of these battles, but stopping their advance in this sector is proven very difficult. In the Pokrovsk direction, the situation remains challenging. The Russians are actively attempting to break through to the highway and are advancing towards the outskirts of Myrnohrad and Pokrovsk. Heavy fighting continues near Mykolaiivka, and from Novogrodivka, they are pushing toward Lysivka. While the Russians have made some gains in recent days, over the last 2 days, the front line has remained unchanged, with the Ukrainian forces successfully repelling all attacks. In Selidove, the situation is also difficult. The city is semi-encircled, but the Russians haven't made further advances on the flanks, focusing instead on direct assaults. A similar situation is unfolding in Tsukurene and Zhelane Druge, where the Russians are trying to break through directly, advancing towards Izmailivka near Tsukurene. In the Kurakhove direction, the Russians have managed to advance nearly 4 kilometers from the last front line and are attempting to push further towards Kurakhove itself. The situation is critical, as Kurakhove has become the primary target for the Russian forces in this area, and they are sparing no resources in their efforts to capture it. Battles are also raging near Maximilianivka, Katerinivka, and the village of Kostiantynivka, but for now the Russians haven't achieved any new successes in these areas. In the Vuhledar direction, the Russians continue to celebrate their capture of the city, which they had been assaulting for nearly 2 years. However, fighting hasn't ceased in the area around Bohoyavlenka, where the Russians are attempting to break through to the outskirts. In the Zaporizhzhia direction, the Russians are assaulting Kupiansk. Both sides are reporting that forces are being gathered by both the Ukrainian forces and the Russians, indicating that this area is likely preparing for larger scale operations. We are still waiting to see how events will unfold, but for now, the Ukrainian forces continue to strike deep into Russian-occupied territory. It was reported that an explosion occurred yesterday in Berdyansk, though no further details have been released yet. In the Kherson region, the situation remains unchanged. The fighting is currently limited to Shalin, with no new Russian offensives taking place on the left bank. And that's all from me. So please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Bye bye.